Beth Brooke is Global Vice Chair of Public Policy at Ernst & Young and a member of the firm's Global Executive Board. I'm not going to read a whole lot more than that, other than to say that she is a terrific person to work with and for. I can see why she was named 4 times to the Forbes World's 100 Most Powerful Women, because she is. I'm going to leave it at that. Beth is very active in CED, a number of other organizations, some of which I know people are here today representing. And let me ask Beth to come up, and the panel please come up also.
Thank you so much, Elliot. As the panel gets settled in, let me just make some opening remarks. Good afternoon. It's great to be with you. Sorry to not be able to see around the corner. That's unfortunate, but I'll move away from the podium here in a second. We have a great group of panelists. So we're going to have a fabulous discussion. We're so sorry Ted could not be with us, but we'll just represent his views and misrepresent them. He'll wish we were here. We are going to try to have a real conversation, so not to debate why this is important, but to debate how we get there, sort of to Jim's point, that this, when he framed it beautifully, these numbers are not that big to be able to make a significant difference. So a couple of comments just to frame the discussion. You know, the uniqueness of the U.S., if we just think back about our history, almost from our inception, has been the ability to integrate culturally diverse viewpoints and perspectives and to get the most out of them and to leverage them and to empower them. So what made us great in the economic growth of the United States is that innovative advantage, and it is embedded in our culture. And so it is frustrating that we are not a global leader on the issue of creating top leadership opportunities for women. And so, as the CED report does point out, and as Jim said, this issue is, as we believe, an issue for American competitiveness, and at a time when America really needs economic growth, this is an untapped engine lying right beneath our noses, and the numbers aren't that hard. It's also interesting that the economists would tell us that we are falling behind on this issue, and the actions of other countries would confirm that the United States is falling behind on this issue of women's leadership. Just a couple of points about that. The economists at Booz & Company tell us that women are an emerging market around the world. And they've quantified it. And they've said that women are coming into economic power around the world, developing countries, developed countries, with such economic force over the next decade that their numbers of that economic power are third in size, only behind the economic power of India and the economic power of China. So when we're thinking about adding 50 women to boards or 850 women to boards, representing that economic power, a CEO faced with that decision of whether to add and invest in a woman on his board ought to think about how that CEO is investing in India and how they're investing in China. And if they aren't investing in women similarly, then that's how they ought to frame that decision of why not. And as Jim said, the other countries clearly have affirmed that with their actions. They think women are an emerging market. When you look at the quota laws that have been passed or being considered all around the world by several countries, when you look at what Australia has done to require transparency, form the male CEO champions of change, they are moving. Jim mentioned the UK, which is sort of under the threat of quotas, actually introduced the Lord Davies report, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. But interesting, 1 year in, they wanted to go, the Lord Davies report called on the UK to go from 12.5% women on boards to 25% women on boards, double the numbers by the year 2015. 1 year in, they're on track, likely to hit 26% based on their projections. They've got search firms signed on to a voluntary code of conduct. So other countries have recognized this as an opportunity. And while we won't perhaps go there in the United States, it's very interesting that just this past week, The Atlantic runs its cover feature article on why women still can't have it all, which I'm sure many of you have read. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to pick up The Atlantic on your way out, or on the newsstands on your way back to your office, because it's very provocative, causing a lot of buzz. But I think the bottom line that was laid out in the article of perhaps why women still can't have it all was the notion that We're never going to change all these issues that we've been debating for years if we can't close the leadership gap. If we could get women equally represented on boards or women equally represented in political offices, we would fix a lot of the underlying conditions that we've debated for years. Last thing I would say is that I know that over the next week or two, several CEOs in the United States are going to receive a letter. They're going to receive a letter from a group called the 30% Coalition. And that letter is going to challenge them as to why they don't have 30% women on their boards and how can they get there. So the timing around this issue is gaining momentum, a lot of people weighing in. And so I think we're at the right point to say, how do we get there? How do we get there? The CED report is simply about, we are in control of our own companies. We don't need legislation to do this, we need will to do this. And so recognizing that CED is a leading business organization, it's really a call to action by CED to take the matter into our own hands and actually do something about it. So with that, let me turn to our panelists and then I'll sit with them. Great group. Joanna Barsh, who is a director at McKinsey & Company. I'm sure many of you know Joanna. She is the researcher extraordinaire. She is an author. She is a speaker. I know her for being totally committed to accelerating the development of women. What I didn't know about Joanna, honestly, is that she leads both McKinsey's consumer packaged goods practices and organization practices and is deep on corporate growth strategy, organizational development, and performance improvement. We are colleagues in crime in the women's space, so it's good to know that, Joanna. Nels Olson, who is vice chairman and co-leader of the board and CEO practice at Korn Ferry. So this is great that we have one of the most senior representatives from the search firms with us today to talk about these issues of supply and demand and can tell us the insides of what's going on. He has completed in excess of 500 successful searches for a wide range of Fortune 500 companies, and it's just outstanding and does a lot of work outside the U.S. as well. So said like there, formerly with Fleshman Hilliard and formerly served in White House personnel under Bush 41. Okay, wonderful. Nels, welcome. And Gail Becker, pleased to have the chair of the Canada and Latin America and president of the U.S. Western Region practices at Edelman. Gail is also the chair of the Global Women's Executive Network at Edelman. She, before that, was vice president of communications at Warner Home Entertainment, and you might remember all the controversy around the launch of the DVD. That was Gail, handling all the press around that. And she was
time dated me, didn't it?
I did. Also in the first Clinton administration, we actually were there together and didn't know it. Worked for Donna Shalala at HHS, head of communications during those infamous healthcare reform times. And as also, before that, a journalist and a movie producer, but we won't go into that detail at this point. So, Joanna, let me turn to you, and then we'll kick it off. And then I may stay standing, because if I sit, I'm just going to disappear behind the podium. And please, I'm going to ask some questions, but I'd love for you to just raise your hand if you have questions or want to ask a clarifying question. Chime right in. Joanna, McKinsey, your work takes you all over the world. You see a lot of things. You research a lot of things. Can U.S. companies get to 30%? I mean, what's the pipeline look like from your standpoint?
Yeah. So even though I'm a professional pessimist,
Use the mic.
I'm at
Share that mic.
I'm gonna share
It's
that.
on. It's on.
It's on.
So even I consider myself a professional pessimist, but I'm very optimistic about this. And I may be the only person in the room who is optimistic. And the reason I am, we just finished a study with 60 companies participating, about 450,000 women involved in that. 12 of the companies, 12 of the 60 or 20%, actually have 30% of their C-suite being women, and we know that feeds boards. There are 4 metrics that these guys win on, and in fact, none of them won on 4 out of 4, but 3 out of 4, and everybody else can improve. Yes, women at the top, but what are the inputs? One is clearly percentage of women at the start of the pipeline, so opening up the funnel. The second, really important, most of the companies that we look at, the advancement rates for women did not equal men, not anywhere close. In a few, for some reason, they must be matriarchal. The odds for women are fantastic. But in most companies, even getting 85% of the same odds as men would be considered successful. And the third piece is keeping women in the line. And I guess we'll come back to that soon, because keeping women in the line means less predictable hours, more travel, more pressure, and all of the things that people struggle with as they think about, do I really want to get to the top? But these 12 companies prove the case, and I rest my case on that.
So they can get women through the pipeline.
They sure can.
They've proven it. It's interesting. So Nels, you're going to have to carry, since Ted's not here, the way of the search firms, and everybody's dying to know. Is it a supply issue or a pipeline issue?
Well, I think I would agree with what Jim said. I think at the end of the day, there are some terrific individuals who are ready, willing, and able to sit on boards. I think it is a demand issue. It's also a focus issue. Having done many searches across the Fortune 500 in the boardroom, I will tell you that the issue of the broader diversity comes up in 90% of the searches that we do. It's a matter of keeping focused on that, because oftentimes what happens is somebody will come into the mix that happens not to be diverse. They happen to be a well-qualified candidate, and next thing you know, if it's not the number one priority, it slips to number 2 or 3, and next thing you know, they have not fulfilled what one of their initial goals was. So I do think, though, and a number of people have mentioned it so far, that what's happening in Norway, what's happening in the UK, has come across the pond. The search firms, the major search firms, have gotten together with our trade group to discuss a voluntary code on this topic. I'm not necessarily sure you'll see legislation, but I do think you will see a much more principled approach on this, and I do think the numbers will change. I think for years, and I've been doing this now for 20 or so years, this has been a topic, but I think it really has reached a crescendo over the last 18 months, where I do think we're going to see some significant movement in the right direction.
Let me ask you, Nels, just to follow that up. If it's not a priority, if a woman candidate for the board, so you get a search request, it's not a priority, and you said if it's not a top priority, it tends to, then suddenly another candidate surfaces, everybody goes, wow, and it's out the window, it's off the list. Where do you see situations where it stays a priority?
Yeah, well, I think it really comes down to leadership, whether it's the CEO, whether it's the chairman of the board, whether it's the lead director, whether it's the head of the nominating governance committee. They've all got to be on the same page on this. And in each situation, it's different in terms of whose point, in terms of the recruiting process, if you will. But whomever out of those, most likely one of those 4 individuals, they need to stay focused on it and keep. And oftentimes, obviously, the head of the nominating governance committee, they've got to keep their group focused as well. And that's obviously where we come into play and make sure that, again, when we're going down these paths, that we come back and discuss where we started and have we fulfilled the mission again where we started.
Do you see the situation of that alignment between all those players getting better over time?
Well, I think, again, given transparency now, given all the issues that you mentioned in terms of where the marketplace is going, the marketplace is driving this in other ways as well. So again, I think that you are seeing more alignment on this, and certainly a much greater awareness than you have in the past.